Ladies and gentlemen, how many of us can honestly say that we've been able to leave everything in God's hands? It's easy to say the words, but when life gets tough, when things don't go as planned, or when the storms of life come crashing in, we find ourselves scrambling for control, grasping at anything we think can provide a solution. Trust in God's plan is one of the most powerful and transformative principles that we can embrace in life. It's easy to get caught up in our own desires and expectations, thinking that we must control everything in our lives. We set goals, make plans, and try to direct our own path, often overlooking the fact that God has a plan for us that goes beyond our own limited vision. To trust in God's plan means to surrender our own desires and allow His will to guide us. It requires a deep understanding that His plan is not only better than our own, but it is also perfectly timed and designed for our growth, purpose, and ultimate good. The truth is, God's plan is always greater than ours. He sees the bigger picture while we often focus on the smaller details. When we trust God's plan, we step back and allow Him to take the lead. This doesn't mean we are passive participants in our lives, but rather we acknowledge that we are not in control, and that's okay. We are called to work, plan, and act, but the results are in God's hands. When we trust His plan, we release the pressure of needing to make everything work on our own. We open ourselves to the possibility that God's plan might look different from what we envision, and we become open to His direction, no matter how it might deviate from our own. One of the key aspects of trusting in God's plan is the recognition that He knows what is best for us. Often we don't see or understand why things happen the way they do, especially when life takes an unexpected turn. The job we wanted falls through, relationships don't work out, or personal goals remain unachieved. In these moments, it's easy to question God's plan and wonder why He's allowing certain things to happen. But in those times of uncertainty, we must remind ourselves that God's wisdom far exceeds our own. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows the deepest desires of our hearts, the lessons we need to learn, and the challenges that will shape us into the person we are meant to be. His plan is not based on temporary comfort or immediate gratification. It is designed to bring us to a place of true fulfillment, spiritual growth, and eternal significance. Trusting in God's plan also means learning to wait. In our fast-paced world, we want things to happen on our timeline, but God operates on a different rhythm. Sometimes trusting in God means enduring seasons of waiting where we might feel frustrated, confused, or even forgotten. Yet, it is often in these waiting periods that we grow the most. It's in the quiet moments of patience that our faith is tested and strengthened. We learn to lean not on our own understanding, but on the unshakable foundation of God's promises. Waiting isn't passive, it's an active trust in God's timing. Just as the farmer waits for the crops to grow, we wait with expectation, knowing that God's plan is unfolding in the right time. We must also remember that trusting in God's plan doesn't mean everything will be easy. There will be obstacles, challenges, and moments of doubt. But through it all, we can hold on to the truth that God's plan is a good plan, one that is filled with purpose, even in the midst of pain. Even when we cannot see the immediate benefit of a situation, we can trust that God is using it for a greater good. Our trials are not in vain, and every step we take, even when it feels uncertain, is part of the journey He has mapped out for us. Letting go of control is one of the most challenging yet liberating aspects of living a life of faith. In a world where we are constantly encouraged to take charge, be self-reliant, and manage every detail, the idea of surrendering control can feel uncomfortable or even unsettling. But there is a profound freedom that comes when we finally release the need to control every aspect of our lives and place our trust in something greater than ourselves. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. It means acknowledging that there are forces beyond our understanding and that ultimately, we are not the ones holding everything together. At the core of letting go of control is the recognition that as much as we plan, prepare, and strive, we cannot guarantee the outcomes. Life is unpredictable, and no amount of worrying or trying to micromanage the details can change that. While we have influence over certain aspects of our lives, the reality is that we cannot control everything. External factors, the choices of others, and circumstances outside of our control can shift things in ways we never anticipated. This realization can be humbling, and yet it opens the door to a deeper level of trust. When we let go of control, we are invited to release our grip on the outcomes of our efforts. It's an act of surrender, acknowledging that we cannot control the future or know every twist and turn that lies ahead. This can feel frightening at first, especially for those of us who like to be prepared and have a clear sense of direction. But in letting go, we give ourselves the freedom to experience life as it comes, trusting that even when things don't go according to plan, there is a larger purpose at work. One of the most significant challenges in letting go of control is the fear of uncertainty. We live in a society that thrives on predictability and security, and the unknown can trigger anxiety. But the truth is, uncertainty is a constant in life, and it's often in those uncertain moments that God does His greatest work in us. When we let go of our need to control, we make space for faith to take root. Faith is not about having all the answers or controlling every detail. It's about trusting that even in the certainty, God is present and working on our behalf. Letting go of control invites us to step into the unknown with confidence, knowing that we are not alone. Letting go also means allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Often we cling to control because it gives us a sense of security. But in reality, the more we try to control, the more we isolate ourselves. We hide behind our plans, thinking that if we just get everything right, we can avoid pain or failure. But when we let go of control, we open ourselves up to experience life fully, both its joys and its challenges. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable to the unknown, to the possibility of disappointment, but also to the possibility of incredible growth, learning, and connection. In letting go of control, we are also invited to embrace God's sovereignty. We acknowledge that He is in charge, that He is the one who ultimately guides and directs our steps. This doesn't mean we abandon our responsibilities or stop making decisions. It means we do so with the understanding that we are not the ultimate authority. We recognize that God's wisdom is greater than ours, and that His plans, even when they are different from our own, are always for our good. Letting go of control is an act of faith, a recognition that God's way is higher than our way, and that by releasing our need to dictate every detail, we allow Him to lead us to places we could never get on our own. Faith over fear is a powerful principle that can transform the way we approach life's challenges. Fear is a natural human response to uncertainty, danger, or the unknown, but faith offers us an alternative, a deeper sense of trust and confidence in something greater than ourselves. While fear often paralyzes us, keeping us from stepping into new opportunities or making difficult decisions, faith empowers us to take bold steps forward, even in the face of adversity. The difference between living in fear and living in faith is not the absence of fear, but the choice to let faith lead our actions rather than being ruled by our anxieties. Fear is often rooted in the unknown. When we face a new situation, we tend to imagine all the worst-case scenarios. Our minds are quick to spiral into what could go wrong, often making the imagined outcome far worse than the reality. But faith challenges us to shift our focus from what we fear to what we believe. Faith invites us to trust in God's promises, even when the road ahead is unclear. It's about choosing to believe that God's presence will guide us through the unknown, even when we can't see the full picture. Instead of dwelling on the worst-case scenario, faith helps us focus on the possibility that things might unfold in ways that are better than we ever imagined. When we choose faith over fear, we begin to embrace the idea that God is in control, even when we feel out of control. Fear can make us feel helpless, as if we are at the mercy of forces beyond our ability to manage. But faith reminds us that we are not alone. We have a higher power, a loving and faithful God who is with us every step of the way. Faith gives us the courage to move forward with the belief that even when we face obstacles, God is with us, guiding us and strengthening us. Faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it, trusting that God's presence is more powerful than our fear. Moreover, faith over fear is about embracing uncertainty with the assurance that God has a purpose in every season of life. Fear often arises when we feel like we are standing on shaky ground, unsure of what comes next. But faith tells us that no matter how uncertain the future may seem, we can trust that God has a plan. His purposes will prevail, and He will work all things together for our good, even when we can't see the immediate benefit of our struggles. Faith enables us to surrender the need for control and instead trust in God's wisdom and timing, knowing that He is orchestrating every detail of our lives with care and intentionality. Another aspect of choosing faith over fear is the power of perspective. Fear has a way of magnifying our problems, making them seem insurmountable. It distorts our vision and keeps us focused on what could go wrong, rather than what God can do. But when we choose faith, we shift our perspective to see things through a lens of hope and possibility. Faith enables us to see challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation. Instead of being intimidated by the obstacles in front of us, we begin to see them as stepping stones, knowing that with God's help, we can overcome anything. Faith gives us the eyes to see that even in the darkest moments, God's light is shining, leading us toward a greater purpose. Choosing faith over fear requires constant practice. It's not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to trust God, especially when fear feels overwhelming. It requires leaning into God's word, praying for strength, and reminding ourselves of his past faithfulness. The more we choose faith, the more we strengthen our ability to walk confidently in the direction that God is calling us, knowing that he is with us every step of the way. Fear will still come, but faith will always be there to push it aside, replacing anxiety with peace and courage to move forward. God's timing is perfect, and understanding this truth can bring a deep sense of peace and trust into our lives. In our fast-paced, results-driven world, we are often conditioned to expect immediate gratification. We plan, we act, and we want things to happen on our schedule. When things don't unfold as we hope, or when we encounter delays or setbacks, we can easily become frustrated, confused, or even anxious. However, when we fully embrace the idea that God's timing is perfect, it shifts our perspective and invites us to trust in a higher plan that transcends our own. At the heart of trusting God's timing is recognizing that he operates on a different rhythm than we do. We are often focused on the short term, thinking in terms of minutes, days, or months, but God sees the whole picture, past, present, and future perfectly. His understanding is infinite, and his wisdom is beyond our comprehension. What might seem like a delay or a detour in our eyes is actually part of a larger plan that God is orchestrating for our good. His timing isn't random or arbitrary. It is intentional, purposeful, and always aligned with his perfect will. One of the key reasons we struggle with God's timing is because we do not see things as he does. We might look at our current circumstances and think that we are ready for something, whether it's a job, a relationship, or a particular life change. However, God knows the exact right moment for those things to happen. He knows the condition of our hearts, the maturity we need, and the lessons we must learn before the next step can unfold. Sometimes we want things now because we think we are ready, but God knows what is best for us, and we will be most prepared to handle his blessings. God's timing also teaches us patience. Patience is not just about waiting, it is about learning to trust in the process and to remain steadfast in our faith, even when things aren't moving as quickly as we'd like. Waiting on God's timing is an opportunity to grow spiritually and emotionally, to deepen our reliance on him, and to recognize that his plan will unfold in the perfect way. There may be times when we feel like the door is closed or the answer isn't coming quickly enough, but it's in these moments that we learn to lean on God's strength rather than our own understanding. As we wait, we are being shaped into the person God intends us to be, ready to receive the blessings he has in store. Moreover, trusting in God's timing allows us to avoid the pitfalls of rushing ahead of him. When we act impulsively or push for things to happen before their time, we often end up in situations that are less than ideal or even harmful. God, in his wisdom, protects us from moving too quickly or making decisions that might lead to regret. In those moments when we feel like time is running out or we are being left behind, we can remember that God is never late, and his timing will always be right. There are also moments in life when God's timing isn't just about us. It's about the people around us and the larger story that he is weaving. Our timing is often centered on our own individual desires, but God's timing encompasses the lives of others as well. He orchestrates events in ways that impact not just us, but those around us. A delay in one area of our lives may be God's way of allowing someone else to step into position, or it might be part of a greater work that only becomes clear later on. We may not always understand how it all fits together, but we can trust that every timing decision made by God is perfect in its purpose. Finally, God's perfect timing is a reminder that we are not in control. In a world where we are taught to plan and manage every detail, it can be humbling to accept that there are aspects of life beyond our control. But this surrender brings freedom. By trusting in God's timing, we release the burden of trying to force things into place and allow ourselves to rest in the assurance that he is working everything together for our good. When we surrender to God's timing, we open ourselves to peace and a deeper trust in his ability to work things out far better than we ever could. Finding peace and surrender is a profound and often transformative experience. In a world that values control, independence, and self-reliance, the idea of surrender can feel counterintuitive, even uncomfortable. We are taught to take charge of our lives, make our own decisions, and rely on our own strength. However, true peace is found when we release the need to control every situation and instead Surrender to the will of God. Surrendering isn't about giving up, it's about yielding to a higher purpose and allowing ourselves to be led by God's wisdom, which far surpasses our own. The peace that comes from surrender begins with the understanding that we are not in control. There is a certain freedom that comes from acknowledging our limitations. Life often presents us with challenges, obstacles, and situations that we cannot change or fix. We may fight against these realities, trying to make sense of them or bend them to our will. But when we surrender, we stop fighting. We recognize that there are things beyond our understanding and control. Surrendering means accepting that we don't have all the answers, but trusting that God does. In that trust, peace begins to settle in our hearts. Surrender also requires letting go of our anxieties and fears. Fear often arises when we feel like we must manage every outcome. When we are unsure of the future, or when things feel out of our hands, anxiety creeps in. But surrendering to God means releasing the weight of our worries. It's about recognizing that God is in control of what we cannot control. By giving up our need for certainty, we find rest in the knowledge that God has a plan for us, a plan that is good, even when it doesn't look like we expected. This kind of surrender isn't passive. It's an active choice to trust in God's goodness and sovereignty, knowing that He is working things together for our good. One of the deepest forms of peace that comes from surrender is the peace of knowing that God is always with us. We often strive for control because we believe that if we can just manage every detail, we can avoid pain or failure. But surrendering to God isn't about avoiding challenges, it's about trusting that we are never alone in those challenges. In every season, whether we are facing difficulties or experiencing blessings, surrender allows us to rest in the truth that God is present. He is walking with us, guiding us and providing for us, even when we don't see how. This relationship with God brings peace, knowing that He is holding us through every circumstance, no matter how uncertain it may seem. Another crucial aspect of finding peace and surrender is understanding that it's not about giving up our responsibility or purpose. Surrendering doesn't mean we stop striving, working, or making decisions. It means doing all of those things with the understanding that the results are ultimately in God's hands. We can still pursue our goals, make plans, and work hard, but we do so with the knowledge that our efforts are part of a much bigger picture. Surrender invites us to act with faith, knowing that even when things don't go as planned, God is in control, and He is using everything for our growth and His glory. Finally, finding peace in surrender requires patience. Often, when we let go of control, we are faced with waiting for answers, waiting for change, or waiting for direction. In these moments, it's easy to feel restless or frustrated, but true peace comes when we learn to wait on God's timing. Waiting is not an absence of peace, but an active trust in God's perfect plan. In the waiting, we can rest in the assurance that He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything according to His perfect will. Surrendering to God's timing, rather than rushing ahead with our own agenda, allows us to find peace in the process, trusting that His way is better than our own. Strength in weakness is a paradox that many struggle to understand. Yet it holds the key to experiencing God's power in our lives in ways we may not have thought possible. In our culture, strength is often associated with self-reliance, independence, and the ability to overcome challenges on our own. We are taught that to be strong means to stand firm, never falter, and always have the answers. However, God offers a different perspective, one where true strength is found not in self-sufficiency, but in acknowledging our weakness and relying on His power. The concept of strength and weakness is beautifully illustrated in the Bible, particularly through the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul speaks of a thorn in the flesh, a persistent struggle that he begged God to remove. Yet God's response was not to take away Paul's suffering, but to remind him that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This profound truth teaches us that when we are at our weakest, God's power is most evident. Our human nature may try to resist vulnerability, but it is in our vulnerability that God's strength shines the brightest. Weakness, in this context, doesn't refer to a lack of willpower or the inability to try. Rather, it refers to our inability to handle life's challenges on our own, recognizing that we are finite, fragile beings in need of divine help. When we admit our weakness, we open ourselves to receive God's grace. It is in the moment we recognize that we can't do everything by ourselves that we are able to experience God's presence and power in our lives. Our weaknesses become a conduit for His strength, not a hindrance. Moreover, embracing our weakness allows us to break free from the unrealistic expectation of perfection. We live in a world that demands achievement, success, and flawless performance, and it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that to be strong means to never show signs of failure or need. But God's economy works differently. He doesn't expect us to be perfect. He expects us to rely on Him. It's through our imperfections and struggles that we learn to depend on His mercy and grace, which are sufficient to meet our needs. True strength is not about appearing invulnerable, but about humbling ourselves and admitting that we need God to sustain us. The strength that comes from embracing weakness also enables us to experience deeper empathy and compassion for others. When we acknowledge our own frailty and limitations, we develop a greater understanding of the challenges that others face. Our weaknesses make us more relatable and compassionate, allowing us to minister to others with genuine care. We become more in tune with the needs of those around us, not because we have all the answers, but because we have walked through our own struggles and know what it feels like to be vulnerable. In this way, God uses our weaknesses to build bridges of connection and love between people. Additionally, strength in weakness is not a one-time revelation, but a continual process. Each time we face a new challenge, a new difficulty, or a season of uncertainty, we are given an opportunity to lean into God's strength. The more we acknowledge our need for Him, the more we grow in spiritual maturity. Our weaknesses become the fertile ground where God's grace can flourish. We come to understand that our limitations are not signs of failure, but invitations to experience God in deeper, more intimate ways. In the end, the strength in weakness is a reminder that God's power is not dependent on our abilities, but on His sufficiency. When we feel at our lowest, we can rest in the truth that God's strength is most evident in our moments of need. It is through our weaknesses that we come to know God's grace in the fullest sense, and in that grace, we find true strength. In conclusion, embracing God's perfect timing, surrendering control, finding strength in weakness, and living with faith over fear are all interconnected aspects of trusting in God's plan. These principles invite us to release our need for control, acknowledge our limitations, and allow God's power to guide us. Through surrender, patience, and dependence on Him, we can experience a peace and strength that surpasses understanding. While the journey may not always be easy, trusting in God's timing and His greater purpose for our lives leads us to a deeper, more fulfilling relationship with Him, rooted in faith, hope, and trust.